Welcome to Black Men Excel. I'm Dr. Jeff Gardere, and our topic for today is Black men's mental health. Is corporate America a cause or a cure? This is certainly a timely discussion in these very turbulent times that we must share. Joining me to talk about this ever important topic, first is Warren Moore. Warren is the Vice President of Pharmacy Operations at Walmart. And also joining us is Dr. Bryant T. Marks, and Dr. Marks is the Chief Equity Officer and at the National Training Institute on Race and Equity. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Glad to be with you.
Glad to be with you for sure.
So Warren, let's talk about this topic. We see that now that we have Black Lives Matter, there certainly has been more of a focus on what is happening with our perhaps reawakening. Many people have said that we have been woke as to what it is that we are experiencing as Black and brown people, but especially as Black men during these very extraordinary times, especially as we're dealing with, I would say, a generational PTSD with regard to what we have suffered in this country with regard to social inequities. What has been your experience?
I would say with with the murder of George Floyd, it really, I would say, caused corporations to start to get on that journey of being woke. And so you've seen more people lean in, which gives us hope, but we have so far to go. I would tell you that right now in this country, we still see deaths that have happened after George Floyd. We see that there's not justice served in the cases like around Breonna Taylor. And so we have a long way to go. The good news is that corporations now are starting to get into the fight, and we know that it's going to take dollars, it's going to take power to help. And without corporations being involved, we don't stand a chance of really getting to equity, racial equity. So I've seen more lean in, and happy that my own company is playing a part of that.
And we certainly thank your company for that. Dr. Marks, many people would say when we're looking at institutions, wanting them to be able to chip in and to help us through this process of getting this social justice, this social equity, in some ways, is this an oxymoron in that we know that the institutions have been at the forefront of many of the what we see as systemic racism? Right.
It's been pretty interesting. So as I mentioned, since George Floyd and maybe a little bit before that, corporations more recently have been willing to have conversations around systemic racism and racial equity in ways they haven't in the past. So I'm a diversity trainer with an emphasis on implicit bias in various organizations. And once George Floyd broke, we got a lot of our Fortune 500 clients reaching out because they were sending out these memos, these internal memos to let their folks know, we're supportive, we're inclusive, we're with you, that sort of thing. And for the first time, many of these C-suite level people, very, very senior people, were actually wrestling with these notions of race in an intimate way for the first time in their lives. And the thing about this was they couldn't fake it. They couldn't have the communications people give them talking points for the listening session. No, when they had listening sessions, Q&A with their frontline people, they were asking them very direct questions. One of our clients, a frontline person asked the CEO, what is our company's stance on reparations? That was a real question. So that required two things. First, the CEO had to know what reparations was. And second, they had to have a stance on it. But we're having these conversations in ways we haven't in the past. Like the fact that in the last 6 months, in conversations with corporate America, I can say things like white privilege and systemic racism and things like that, and everybody doesn't cringe and get all nervous and walk out the room. That's new. Prior to the last few months, that hasn't been the case in the past. So there is a moment we're in where I think corporations could take a step forward if they do not treat this as a fad, if they treat it as a shift. I think there's a lot of possibilities.
But many of the people, when you talk about the frontline folks, right? Many of those frontline folks happen to be Black and brown people, whether frontline, working on the streets and making sure that we get the services that we need, frontline in hospitals, or frontline at many of these corporations. What was it that many of those individuals were going through that in some ways convince the upper echelon, the C-suite, as you call it, to be able to finally this time listen and say, look, we've got to help here. There's so much PTSD going on with our people on the ground level. We've got to do something. Warren, what did you see?
What I saw, and I can, speak from my company's perspective, we've had a history of trying to make sure that all of our associates felt valued, they can move throughout the organization. When we saw it on the front lines and the way this spreads, I was proud to see that we actually gave people the opportunity to raise their hand and say, hey, I'm not comfortable or safe coming to work. And we gave paid leave to our associates. And so I think it's the sensitivity around it. And then, and that's what we saw with COVID, that the disparities that we have seen that have been going on for 400 plus years came to roost. It's not that we're genetically different as to why more Black and brown people have died from COVID. It was what you called out. The jobs that we hold, we're on the front lines. And so the ability for the disease to spread impacted our communities. And then we took it back home. And then, there are health conditions that cause mortality to be more prevalent when there exists. And so I would say that, to look in to see more companies try to give relief on the front lines was really good to see. And I was proud again that our company did that. And we're still doing that, trying to make policies. We closed our stores at certain hours for cleaning. And so really those efforts were there. And I would think the same intentionality that was there around COVID is the same intentionality we need to see when it comes to racial injustice, when it comes to systemic racism. And again, I think going back to something that Dr. Mark said, there was people now, they're leaning in, but some people want quick answers. Like, what are the 1 or 2, 3 things that we can go do? And it's going to take a process. It's going to take intentional effort. It's going to take us to be deliberate. Like we've seen in COVID, I think we need to be deliberate the same way when it comes to racial injustice.
And speaking about this racial injustice, we know that George Floyd was in many ways the catalyst that changed the way that not just Black and brown America, but and I'll say this, but most importantly, white America saw police shootings in a different light. It wasn't just about, well, that's something that happens in another community. Dr. Marks, what was the experience in your particular company? How did the George Floyd shooting, the tragic shooting, really begin to change the way that the upper level, the upper echelon began to look at issues of social justice that had been ignored for so long?
Right. So it was one of those things where it was a Black folks may not be lying moment. So what I mean by that is, throughout the history of our country, Black folks have talked about tensions with police, and white folks would be like, they're exaggerating. It's not that bad. It's not that bad. And when they saw George Floyd, if you are a human being with any moral compass, you knew that was wrong. A slow death. I mean, you knew that was wrong. And so what happened was, it was like, well, maybe Black folks are telling the truth when they say how they feel and being harassed and so forth. So it was such a clear example of an egregious act on the part of law enforcement. And folks, I train a lot of cops, by the way. I trained over 32,000 police officers in the last few years. So we train a lot of police officers. I train all the LAPD, Phoenix PD, Seattle PD. We train a lot of police. And so most police don't do that. Every cop I talked to said that was wrong. But these CEOs, these senior leaders said, okay, this is egregious. This is obvious. This is clear. As a company, given that we have diverse employees, many Black employees, and they're feeling traumatized by that and want to talk about it, it's okay for us to sort of open this dialogue up so that we can have a dialogue about that specific instance, but also what may be going on in our companies. Are we treating people fairly? Do people feel included? Because diversity is one thing, inclusion, as we know, is another. So it became this moment where they had to own the fact that in society, there was some injustice there between police and Black folks, a minority of police and Black folks, but also look internally within your organization. Might remnants of unfairness or bias be there as well? And so there was more of an openness that the George Floyd situation brought to bear than had been present in the past.
And so one of the things that I know as a clinical psychologist that I've seen working like you, Dr. Marks, and certainly Mr. Moore, in working with these companies, I've noticed that a lot of the frontline workers, a lot of the Black and brown folks, and I may have referred to this before, many of them have had some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, nightmares, avoidance of certain situations, the fear that their children may be victim to not just COVID-19, being that we're more at risk for because of morbidity, which is part of the situation, but also that when we look at these police shootings, we know that this could happen to anyone who's Black and brown. So the fear of what happens to our children, having to have that talk. What has been, for both of you, and I'll put this question out there, starting with you, Warren, what has been your particular experience? I want you to tell me, for you as a Black man, looking at these police shootings, not just within your own home, but also within your corporation. What has that experience been like for you? What have you seen with some of the people who work below you or work with you?
Yeah, and I think to frame up as we talk around this session, really here on mental health, and is the corporations causing it or not, or are they helping? When it came, I'll go back to George Floyd and then talk a little bit about what I experienced and how I was probably more determined to force those conversations within our workplace. During that week when George Floyd passed, that week I celebrated my oldest daughter graduating from college. I celebrated 14 years of marriage to my wife, and I celebrated a birthday. And George Floyd's death happened that same week. And I can remember in the midst of all of that celebration, having that one day my wife comes rushing in to my office at home, and she was crying. And she was crying as though she had lost a parent. And I knew that cry because she had recently done so, lost her mother. And so she was crying, and she looked at me and said, I don't know if people will see you when you leave this house. Will they see you as the loving father, the Walmart executive, or will they see you as a threat? And you may not come back. And so that hit me so hard that I made sure that in every meeting, when I started off that Monday, that at every meeting I started off on how I'm feeling, and I shared and forced that conversation to the tune of my peers. They were willing and open to have that conversation, and that sparked a lot. And I would say today, I've done podcasts within the church in my community. I have done videos with my direct supervisor. And anytime I sit with someone, I don't want to just tell them about my experience and what I'm feeling. I want you to talk to me about the journey that you're on. And especially being white Americans, what's the journey that they are on to learn more, to understand what it is we go through, because we need allies. We need people to stand up and be anti-racist. So for me, it hit home in the midst of celebration. It made me more determined to have those conversations. And then anytime I have those, I bring people along to say, you have to tell and share what's the journey that you're on so we can actually be on this together.
And Dr. Marks?
Yeah, so I'll look at it, approach it from a couple of angles. So in addition to being of the National Training Institute of Race and Equity, I'm also a tenured professor of psychology at Morehouse College. So I'm a social psychologist. I'm around young Black men all the time. And when we have these discussions, you know, these are young Black males who are out in the street and things like that in Atlanta, but they go home to their respective cities. And we talk about, yes, I know them. I know you're brilliant, wonderful, smart. You have ambitions. You're going to be an engineer, PhD. I see that all day, every day. I see Black male achievements through a certain lens all day, every day. And to Warren's point, the world may not see them that way. So we have these conversations about, you know, impression management, how you present yourself, how you speak. Yes, you have to do a little extra. I have the talk in informal ways with them about police interactions. So yes, I'm dealing with, you know, over my career, several thousand Black males who in various parts of the country are dealing with this in a very real way. And I do tell them, and Jeff, I hope you endorse this as well, but in my trainings, even when I talk to young men, I tell them, don't watch that George Floyd video over and over again, because that's trauma. And every time you watch it, you're just cementing that trauma. I mean, once is enough. We get it. It's bad. I don't know that you got to watch it over and over again. Just sort of, And so I tell them in trainings, hey, watch it once, you'll get it, you'll understand. But we have to sort of balance that out because we don't want them having PTSD vicariously, from a distance. And so they can take that with them into various settings, whether it's the workplace, corporate America, or law school or med school. And so we try to give them a foundation, at the college that gives them some balance, positive examples and so forth, and understanding that these things are going to happen. It's just part of the Black American experience.
And Warren, what is your particular corporation? And here we're talking about Walmart, but I would like for that to be an example, of course, for many other corporations. What have they done, or what do they need to do? Corporations need to do in order to begin addressing the mental health challenges that many of our young people are in many ways incurring because of what has happened with COVID-19, what has happened with the unarmed shootings of Black people, not just Black men, but as we know, women also. What are some of the ways that we can help with the help of these institutions and corporations to begin bringing Black men, Black young women into the threshold, into that place where they can begin getting mental health services?
Yeah, when we think around mental health, it's anything that really affects the way you think, the way you behave, and the moods that you have. And what we just talked about in leading up to this point is around the traumas. And we know that traumas, whether it's childhood traumas, whether it's traumas like Dr. Mark said, don't continue to watch that and put that in your mind. But it's the loss of a loved one, as we talked about through COVID. It can be a change in your financial situation. And so when you think about these traumas, and we know that there's this new phenomenon called weathering that Black people actually undergo because of racism and discrimination. We need corporations to lean in and provide outlets. I would say one of the things that I'm proud of that our corporation does do is that we have a product called Resources for Living, or Resource there. And you can call free of charge, and you can actually get the mental help you need. One of the things I want to say to all our viewers is that your health information is protected. And so all corporations have to protect your health information. It's the law. And if they share something about you, you have legal recourse. And so you're protected by the law, but we've stood up what we call Resources for Living that help. And I think these things are important because corporations need to create what they call psychological safety. So how do people come in and be free and to talk and have a safe space? One of the things we did as well, we have these 9 resource groups that really help associates identify with community. So we have a Black and African American one, we have a Latinx one, an Asian one, but we also have one around disabilities, and it's called Enable, including people of all abilities. One of the things we did to try to create psychological safety, if you will, is we had a campaign called My Disability, My Story, which we had people talk around mental health. And we wanted leaders to come out. We wanted people to record stories to show that you're not just the only one in a corporation that's going through it, and that there's safety in numbers. And so I think what corporations can do in order to lean in and provide resources through the HR department, what they can do to create psychological safety by having individuals share stories and to talk about it. And then know that you are protected from your home health information, and go get the help that you seek. And so that's what I've seen from our corporation.
And Dr. Marks, of course, with the National Training Institute on Race and Equity, how do we get young people to know? How do we get people who are part of these corporations who are Black and brown? How do we get them to, in many ways, begin to feel like they are accepted, that they are whole individuals who are making a contribution, and therefore their mental health matters?
I think it begins with the culture of the organization, right? Because it's one thing to say we want our Black and brown folks to feel included. It's another thing to say we want everyone to feel included and sincerely feel that about Black and brown folks as well. So if it's a holistic culture of inclusion, of respect, of support, of being valued, then, and it's demonstrated in a variety of ways, right? Are you present in the room? If you have an idea, will somebody listen to you? Do people speak to you when they come in? We do a lot of training for city and county governments and different organizations. And we've heard from frontline staff, they'll say, when I go to work, sometimes I feel invisible. Maybe somebody, a receptionist, somebody in the copy room, the mail room, they say our bosses come in with their fancy titles and degrees. It's like we don't exist. They don't say good morning. They walk right past us. That sort of thing, those little things, good morning, eye contact, acknowledging somebody's presence, that they belong, that they have some level of value. Those little things can matter, as well as formal structured programs. So if you have mentoring at multiple levels, even support staff, can benefit from mentoring. There's other ways that you can engage folks, and it doesn't have to be time and cost intensive. It just has to, be thoughtful. And so once you sort of go through these processes, you listen to them because they have ideas. What would you like to see here? What will make you feel more connected, more valued, more part of the organization? And if you have an annual engagement survey or cultural climate survey, whatever you want to call it, whatever data you collect, right? When you're asking employees what can make you feel more included and so forth, actually analyze that data and act on it. The CEO can say, we did our survey last year. This is what we found. These 3 themes. This is what you told us. This is what we're doing to address that. Just that in and of itself can say, wow, they took what we said into account. I feel like I matter because I gave opinion, work this way up.
Yeah. And as part of mattering, we have to talk about, right, the Black and brown people who come into many of these corporations, institutions, graduating from college, a lot of promise. But as I like to say, if you talk the talk, you got to walk the walk. And part of contributing to the mental wellness of many of our people going into these corporations is literally breaking that glass ceiling. Where do they get the opportunities to be able to not get caught up in the John Henryism of working. And Dr. Marks, you know exactly what I mean by that. Working and then just not getting that prize, beating their heads against that glass ceiling. Warren, let me ask you, what is it that your particular corporation is doing to make sure that there is advancement and that there is a recognition that Black lives do matter?
I can say, one, that it's been so refreshing to hear. You know, some people won't say that phrase, Black Lives Matter. And our CEO actually says it in meaning, and I've seen him on this journey prior to what we talked about here with George Floyd. But one of the things that we've done recently to lean in even more and again be intentional is that we've created what we call a Center for Racial Equity. And we've outlined four pillars specifically both focused on the Black and African American community. And those pillars are around finance, education, criminal justice, and health. I, being a pharmacist and being an officer within our health and wellness business, I'm leading the health pillar for the company. But one of the things that you talked about when we think around finance and even education is how we are looking at our workforce and beginning to look at different levels and how individuals are matriculating throughout our workforce. We realize that there's mentoring programs that need to happen within that, and we're actually charting a path with real action and resources, people, and money behind that in order to continue to create advancement within the company. And so I think it's identifying. We know that mentorship helps because you need someone to kind of tell you and walk you through. We know that it's around the assignments that you get early on. Do you get the stretch assignments and be able to have an opportunity to do more? And then you need sponsorship at the end of the day. You need someone who knows your work from what you've done, from opportunities you've had. Then someone will put their credit bill and their political capital on the line to advocate for you. And so that's the path we're trying to get on. And the key is you can ask for a mentor, but you can't ask for sponsorship. And so we got to get leaders that understand and identify and then sponsor diverse associates to get through our organization, and we're on that path now.
And Dr. Marks, how do we in these particular corporations, I know it's just hard to do this in regular life at schools and homes and so on, how do we begin to smash that stigma around discussing mental health challenges and actually getting that therapy, which I hope is in many ways provided by the employee assistance programs in your particular corporations?
Yeah, so we talk to our partners and clients. They're beginning to sort of understand the for many of them, you want to connect it to the bottom line. I mean, that may sound a little crass, but if we say, look, you're going to have lost productivity, people are work stressed out. If they have things in life that are happening that they can't manage effectively, it's in your best interest and the interest of your shareholders to have mentally healthy employees. That gets their attention, right? The moral good stuff gets it too, but the bottom line connection, so it's both. And so we say you want to provide an easy path for folks who need mental health support to get it, regardless of their role or rank. Yes, you want to keep it private. You don't want to penalize them. You don't want to have a little rumor mill going. You could have a culture that says we embrace mental wellness, whatever that looks like for you. The CEO should say that consistently. Okay, so for some folks it is formal therapy. For some folks it's maybe executive coach or life coach or whatever alternative level of support you want to label it. But the notion that we could all benefit. I mean, who couldn't benefit from an objective third party help you deal with life? Like, who doesn't benefit from that? What's the downside? Like, I've always felt that was always just like, cool. And if you can do it for free, I got benefits to help this person help me, let's go for it. So the stigma of it, I guess, depends on your lens. But from a cultural perspective, mental wellness, getting that coach, getting that therapist to help you be the best version of yourself at home and at work, I think that permeates the entire organization from the board on down, because I train a lot of board members for these companies as well, and they have to get it too. Because if they're setting the direction to a certain extent for the company, if they're on board, no pun intended, but if they're involved in it, that sends a signal as well. So I think top down, you embrace it, it becomes cultural. And then these companies need to sort of embrace and understand the unique challenges that Black males face in a corporate space that could be the sources of stress, right? So the Center for Talent Innovation did a study, came out a few months ago, which was a report. Black men actually are more ambitious and want to do a lot with their jobs, but they also feel they have less access to senior leadership. So Warren talked about that in terms of mentoring. They think more about leaving. They feel they have to work twice as hard to hold half as much thing. They feel that the companies lack effective diversity, equity, inclusion efforts. So the data is there that tells them this is what Black men in your corporations are dealing with, the sources of stress, some of them, okay? So then you can come up with solutions to address those challenges. So we try to be evidence-based, but we push the cultural piece, that this is a marathon and not a sprint in terms of doing the work.
And that cultural piece is really important because one of the things we know, the studies have shown us over and over again, in order to get Black and brown people to achieve, to be able to recognize their own talents, we certainly have to show that we are Afrocentric, especially in our corporations, that we embrace who they are as Black and brown people. How do we see that playing out, Warren, in some of the corporations that you've worked with and where you are right now?
Yeah, I would go back. I think that notion around culture is so important because companies can have values that they list and put on the wall, but culture is how people experience those values within a company. And I think it's so important to, as you go into a place to try to, as best you can, as you pick an employer, to understand what are the values of that company. If you can get a glimpse and understanding how people are experiencing it, you get this notion around culture. And then if you can align what matters to you with the culture of an organization, you have the ability to be able to stay there. I would say that none are perfect. And one of the things that I also believe that as we get in and as you get into a company and matriculate, and so again, I've been with Walmart now 18 years. And being there, I said earlier how I forced some of those conversations, I had those conversations. I think you have to be willing to create for the leaders out there that are sitting there in the spots like we are. How are we there willing to help create the environment that we see? Are we willing to raise our voice and then let it be heard so that we can help the individuals that come into the company? And I've been taught that I used to have a pastor say, when you overcome, you help somebody else come on over. And so how do we actually do those things to help those behind us? And I'm fortunate to be in that spot today and really trying to chart that. And the last thing I'll say around that is that when companies say they're going to do something, one, we talked about resourcing it, putting people behind it. But if it doesn't make dollars profitable to the company, then it becomes an initiative or a 1 or 2 year just fad that Dr. Mark's talking about. One of the things we're trying to do at Walmart is actually put it within the business. We call it shared value, that it creates value for the community, that it creates value for the people in the community, and it creates value for us as a company. When those align, you can sustain your efforts. And so we're on this journey trying to sustain those efforts, but I would just encourage every leader out there, when you get an opportunity and you have a seat or you have a voice, how do you use that voice to help those that are coming in and to show them the ropes?
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point and leads me to my last question, and I'll throw that one to you, Dr. Marks. What do we need to do as Black men working in these corporations to continue to push the envelope on making sure that the mental health of our Black and brown people are taken care of, are addressed in working for these monoliths, in working for these companies where typically they have been ignored, typically where whatever issues they've had with racism have been denied, where implicit bias has kept them from achieving their potential, and especially now in these times in addressing a lot of the trauma that they experience each and every day. What do we need to do?
I think we need to institutionalize the conversation. So what happens is, I think we're in this moment now because people say, well, we provide implicit bias training. And somebody says, oh, it's a hot topic. It may be a fad here today, gone tomorrow. Implicit bias has been studied for 50 years. It's not going anywhere. It's just that a lot of these companies are becoming aware of it now. And if it doesn't move the needle right away, they're like, okay, we're on to something else. I think this moment where the country's loving Black folks, I think that may be a fad. I don't know how long we're going to be here, 6, 9, 12 months. We have these conversations, and then the winds of change blow and you're on to somebody else. So what I encourage is institutionalize the conversation. Present this as a marathon. So you get a 5-year strategic plan, put your racial equity stuff in there, mental health for Black males in there, put it in there for the long term. Add it as a budget line item and get a long-term commitment so that when the country changes, it goes out of style. This company, we value this as something internal to us, longevity. If you have a race equity committee or council, give them a budget, give them the ear of the CEO, and you give them something that's longevity, and you don't just pile more things on their plate. Take something off so they can do the equity work, right? Because if they start to underperform, then it's like, they have to choose. So give them the freedom of flexibility. So structure it for success with a budget, with time, with longevity. That's how you can push it. And for some Black men who are comfortable being able to share their experience. Hey, I had this issue when I was at this stage. I got some help. It really helped me. I elevated. It's telling their story about, they were on the other side of going through some trauma, some challenges in their personal, professional lives, being willing to share that. Because a lot of us have these testimonials, but we feel somehow it may be held against us. And depending on the culture, it might. So you have to sort of weigh your situation, but those testimonials can be very powerful for folks who are coming up through the ranks.
And I think it's so well said, given that we do have many initiatives now driven by White House towards the federal government to stop funding, certain federal programs having to do with exactly what we're discussing here, looking at implicit bias, looking at racism and how it affects our mental health. But I will say that we have to keep the fight going. It is about our mental wellness. Let's continue getting that therapy. Let's continue these programs. And I thank both of you for joining us. We'll have to leave it here. Once again, joining us, Warren Moore, Vice President, Pharmacy Operations at Walmart, and Dr. Bryant T. Marks, Chief Equity Officer at the National Training Institute on Race and Equity. Everyone, thank you for joining us, and we will talk with you soon.